In the name of God, hello everybody. This is the first session of your discourse analysis lesson. In this session, I want to talk about some introduction, information about the discourse analysis and talks about linguistic forms and functions. The analysis of discourse is necessarily the analysis of language in use. So, what is the analysis of discourse? It is the analysis of language in use. As such, it cannot be restricted to the description of linguistic forms, independent of the purpose or function which those forms are designed to serve in human affairs. So, besides the form of the language, we should, in discourse analysis, we should pay attention to the function and to the purpose of the language. While some linguists may concentrate on determining the formal properties of a language, the discourse analysis is committed to an investigation of what that language is used for. Okay, so in discourse analysis, besides the forms of language which linguists pay attention to that function of the language, the discourse analysis should pay attention to functions either. So we want to talk about some functional dimension of the language. In this view, we can divide the language use into purposes. First, transactional view, and the second, interactional view. First, I want to talk about the transactional view. Okay, the function the function which language serves in the expression of content we will describe as transactional. Okay, linguists and linguistic philosophers tend to adopt a limited approach to the function of language in society. Many linguists pay just attention to the form of the language. They do not pay many attention to the function of language in society. While they frequently acknowledge that language may be used to perform many communicative functions, they nonetheless make the general assumption that the most important function is the communication of information. So these the persons who many more pay attention to the transactional view, they think that the general the purpose or use of the language is just for communication of information. It means that we use language just to transfer a kind of information, and this is the function of language. Okay, we shall call this kind of view as transactional language or transactional view. So the persons who believe in transactional language and transactional view, they think that the main and the most important part of the language is just for conveying information. Okay, this is a transactional view. Okay, but the other view is interactional view. As you see here, this function involved in expressing social relations and personal attitudes we will describe here as interactional. So the persons who pay attention to this view, interactional view, they think that the most or the main function of the language is for social relationship and for personal attitudes. It is clearly the case that a great deal of everyday human interaction is characterized by the primarily interpersonal rather than primarily transactional use of language. What seems to be primarily at issue here is the sharing of a common point of view. Okay, so this is the second part of the language. In this part, as I said to you, the most part of the function of language is believed to convey, I mean, personal attitudes and social relations, and not just information. It is used for, I mean, social relationship in the society. So this is the second, I mean, part. For example, when two strangers are standing, I mean, at a bus stop, for example, in an icy day, they may say to, I mean, each other, it's cold. Okay, it is difficult to suppose that the primary intention of the speaker is to convey information. Okay, it seems much more reasonable to suggest that the speaker is indicating, I mean, a readiness to be friendly and to talk. So, indeed, a great deal of ordinary everyday conversation appears to consist of one individual commenting on something which is present to both him and his listener. For example, the weather is, of course, the most quoted example, I mean, in the languages. They use, I mean, for example, the sentences about the weather to just show the kind of friendliness and just to want to talk to somebody. So this is not for just conveying information, I mean, in this view. But we use language, as I said to you, to expressing social relation and personal attitude. This is the second part of the use of language. So the use of, I mean, each, I mean, language or each sentence we use may be convey one of these two, I mean, views. First, transactional. We just use this kind of view for just conveying information. And the second one, it's not for conveying information, it is for expressing social relation and personal attitudes. So in this view, I want to talk about the spoken and written language, because sometimes I mean, the person think that for the first one, I mean, transactional view, I mean, most of the time we use written language for conveying information, and the second one we use spoken language, because when we want to express our, I mean, attitudes and our emotions and our social relation, we use spoken language. So I want to talk about the differences which exist between spoken and written language. First of all, I want to talk the manner of production. What is the difference of spoken and written language in manner of production? From the point of view of production, it is clear that spoken and written language make somewhat different demands on language producers. Okay, I mean, there are some differences between written language and spoken language in the manner of production. For example, in a spoken language, the voice quality effect, we have a kind of, I mean, voice quality effect in spoken language. The speaker has available to him the full range of voice quality effect. For example, as well as facial expression, postural, gestural system, we have a, I mean, body language to have a kind of effect on our hearer and listener. Armed with these, he can always, I mean, override the effect of words he speaks. So we can, by, I mean, body language and by voice quality effect, we can increase our effects of, I mean, spoken language on the hearer and on the, I mean, listener. So this is the quality which belongs to just spoken language, not written language. Okay, this is the first one. This is the first difference. The second difference, monitoring the speaking. The speaker must monitor what it is that he has just said and determine whether it matches his, I mean, intentions, while he is uttering his current phrase and monitoring that, and simultaneously planning his next utterance and fitting that into the overall pattern of what you want to say and monitoring. So the speaker, I mean, there are some difficulties in spoken language because the speaker should think about, I mean, her or his sentences. When he, I mean, utter a sentence, simultaneously he or she should think about the next sentence. Okay, so this is the difficulty of spoken language, but in written language, I mean, there aren't such a difficulty. The third difference, so this is the second difference between a spoken language and written language. The third difference is that considerable pressure to keep on talking. The speaker is under considerable pressure to keep on talking during the period allotted to him. So the speaker, I mean, cannot, I mean, stop in the middle of his speaking. So there are kind of pressure on the speaker to keep on talking. So this is another difficulty for spoken language and for the speaker. Okay, the fourth one, I mean, the difference between a spoken language and written language, access to immediate feedback. This is the, I mean, positive point. The speaker can observe his interlocutor, I mean, and if he wishes to modify what he is saying to make it more accessible or acceptable to his hearer. This is the positive, I mean, point of the speaking and the spoken language, because the speaker, I mean, see her, I mean, listener, and so when he see the listener, he can see her feedback or his feedback. Okay, so because of this feedback, he may I mean, have a kind of more information, more explanation to convey his or her speaking. So this is seeing the feedback of the listener or the hearer, I mean. This is the positive point of the speaking language. So there are some, I mean, positive points and negative points for the speaker. For example, using this kind of voice quality, this is the positive point. Or monitor or access to immediate feedback is the positive point. But monitoring the speaking or considerable pressure to keep on talking, these are the, I mean, negative point of the speaking. But in written language, look over the writing. The writer may look over what he has already written, pause between each word with no fear of his interlocutor, I mean, interruption him. Take his time in choosing a particular word, even looking it up in the dictionary if necessary. Check his progress with his notes, recorder, I mean, what he has written, and even change his mind about what he wants to say. So this is the, I mean, positive point of the written language, because the writer has, I mean, many times to think about what you want to write and pause between each word, and even choose a particular word in a dictionary if necessary, and record what he want to, I mean, to write, even change his, I mean, writing. So this is the positive points of the, I mean, written language, which spoken language, I mean, doesn't have this kind of positive points. Cross out the mistakes. The writer even can cross out and rewrite in the privacy of his study. If he think that, for example, what he, I mean, wrote is, for example, there is a kind of mistake in the writing, he can, I mean, cross out and rewrite his study again. So this is another positive point of written language. But there are some negative points again for the written language. No access to immediate feedback. The writer has no access to immediate feedback and simply has to imagine the reader's reaction. So the writer, I mean, doesn't see his listener or her listener. So just she should, I mean, imagine the reader's reaction, and based on that imagination, he or she should write the, I mean, written text. And the other positive point of the written language is no pressure. There is no pressure. Writer is under no such pressure like speaker. So the writer, I mean, has many times to think about the written text, and there is no such a pressure like a speaker to keep on, for example, talking. So these are the differences, I mean the positive points and the negative points of the spoken language and the written language. So the other part of this session which I want to talk about it is the is the text, huh? Okay, so I want to talk about the text. What is the text and what is the written text and the spoken text, which I want to talk about it in this part. Okay, so the representation, I mean this is the written text. First of all, I want to talk about the written text. So far, as you see, we have considered in very general terms some of the differences in the manner of production of writing and speech. So before we go on to discuss some of the ways in which the forms of speech and writing differ, we shall consider in the next two sections some of the problems of representing written and spoken language. Okay, sometimes I have to represent written and spoken language. So in these two parts, I want to talk about the problems of this representation of the written and spoken language. We shall place this within a general discussion of what it means to represent a text. What is a text? We shall use text as a technical term to refer to the verbal record of a communicative act. Okay, text is a verbal record of a communicative act. So we have two kinds of text: written text and spoken text. First, written text. The notion of a text as a printed record is familiar in the study of literature. A text may be differently presented in different editions, with different typeface, on different sizes of paper, in one or two columns, for example, and we still assume from one edition to the next that the different presentation all represent the same text. Okay, so maybe in the text, there are some differences in the size of paper, in the columns, typeface, the size, and many other things. It is important to consider just what it is that is the same. Minimally, the words should be the same words. When we want to rewrite a text, recorded text, a written text, the words should be the same words. We cannot change the word. Presented in the same order. Again, we cannot change the order of the words. It is clear that more than simply reproducing the words in the correct order is required. It is necessary to replicate punctuation convention. We cannot change either the punctuation of the source writing text. So we cannot change the words, we cannot change the order, we cannot change the punctuation, as well as the lineation, which indicates the changes of speaker. An adequate representation of a text must assign speeches to the correct characters, sentences to the correct paragraph, and paragraphs to the correct chapters. Okay, the author's organization and staging of his work must be preserved. Okay, so in the written text, when we want to rewrite a kind of text, okay, and save it, we cannot change the words, we cannot change the word order, and we cannot change even the punctuation, even the paragraph. So this is the rule for rewriting a kind of written text. This is about the written text, and we should keep all of those orders and the words, and this is the written text. It must be clear, however, that a printed version of a handwritten text is in an important sense an interpretation. This is particularly clear in the handwritten attempts of very young children. This is an example about young children in the book, but I can't explain it. This is not necessarily information part of this this part. So just I want to talk about the keeping the parts of the source written text, and this is what I said to you about it. Again, I talk about it. So we should keep the words, we should keep these orders, we should keep the punctuation, the staging, the paragraphs, and the chapters. This is so we should, the author's organization and staging of his work must be preserved. Okay, in a piece of expository prose, for example, in a prose, the author's indication of the development of the argument contributes to the reader's experience of the text. Thus, titles, for example, chapter headings, subdivisions, subheadings, all indicate to the reader how the author intends his argument to be chunked. Where the original text exploits typographical variety, a text reproduced in one typeface may lack some of the quality of the original. We have, so far been making the simplifying assumption that it is clear in all cases what the original text consists of. We should, preserve the original text part. So we cannot change the parts of the original text. We should preserve that parts. Okay, this is the written text. As I told you, the conclusion is that we should preserve all parts of the written text. Okay, when we rewrite the source written text. But in a spoken text, the problem encountered with the notion of text as the verbal record of a communication act, this is the definition of text, become a good deal more complex when we consider what it means by spoken text. So the spoken text is when we want to preserve the spoken text, this is our work is become more difficult and problematic. So the simplest view to assume is that a tape recording of a communicative act will preserve the text. So when we want to preserve the spoken text, we should use a kind of tape recording, okay, to record the spoken text. In general, the discourse analysis works with tape recording of an event. He has to determine what constitutes the verbal event and what form he will transcribe in it. Unless the analysis produce a fine-grained phonetic transcription, details of accent and punctuation are lost. So when we use a kind of tape recording for record the spoken text, maybe the punctuation, for example, features and the accent are lost in the tape recording. You see, in general, analysis represents speech using normal orthographic convention. Problems with representing the segmental record of the words spoken pale into insignificance compared with the problem of representing the supersegmental record. For example, the supersegmental features like, for example, tense or length or stress. These are the supersegmental features. The effect of an utterance being said kindly and sympathetically is clearly very different from the effect if it is said brutally and harshly. Similarly, it is usually possible to determine from a speaker's voice, sometimes sometimes we can guess the speaker's sex or the speaker's educational status or his or her age just by her or his voice sometimes, or either the health or the personality. but it is not customary to find any detail relating to these indexical features of the speaker in a transcription by discourse analysis. The response of most analysis to this complex problem is to present their transcription of the spoken text using the convention of the written language. We can, use those convention of the written language for the spoken text. For example, we can use, punctuation features like the written language for the spoken language. So the perception and interpretation of each text is essentially subjective. Different individuals may pay attention to different aspects of the text. The content of the text appeals to them or fits into their experience differently because we have different, experiences. In discussing text, we idealize away from this variability of the experiencing of a text and assume the reciprocity of perspective, where we take it for granted that readers of a text or listeners to a text share the same experience. Okay, so we imagine that the readers of a text or listeners to a text share the same experience. Clearly, for a great deal of ordinary everyday language, this assumption of an amount of overlap of point of view sufficient to allow mutual comprehension is necessary. When we have the same experience, we have a kind of mutual comprehension with each other. So this is about the spoken text. So you see here there are some difficulties about the spoken text and about the written text, and there are some differences between written language and spoken language, and I talk about two kind of views: transactional views for just conveying information and interactional view for a kind of expressing social relations. Then I talk about the written language and spoken language, the positive points and negative points of both. And at last I talk about written text and spoken text and how we can keep and save and rewrite the source language by written text or spoken text. Okay, thank you for your attention. That's enough for today, and goodbye everybody.